Hello. Hi, everybody. My name's Eric Cohn with Indiewire. Thanks so much for coming out today for the first of our Tiff Talks. These are being live streamed on the Toronto website, and we'll be running excerpts later. So we want to thank our friends at the Toronto Film Festival for helping us host these as we've done in previous years. We're super excited about the slate this year, and the film we're going to talk about today is a great way to kick it off. But I hope you'll stick around. Today we've got the great French filmmaker Claude Lelouch. After this was Jean Dujardin talking about Un plus Un. Tomorrow we'll have Michael Moore talking with Ann Thompson in the afternoon. And on Monday, a film that just won at a major prize at the Venice Film Festival, Charlie Kaufman's Anomalisa, will be the subject of a conversation. And there's a number of others as well. So we hope you'll check out the full schedule and come on by. Because we're just really thrilled by how diverse this lineup is. It speaks to the range of films in this year's festival. On Tuesday, I'll also be joined by my colleague Ann Thompson for a live recording of our weekly podcast, Screen Talk, at which point you can come out and argue with us or ask any questions you might have, so we hope you'll be there as well. But for today, we're thrilled to start with Son of Saul. This is a movie that I saw at the Cannes Film Festival earlier this year, and as you can imagine, a movie that deals with a drama in the concentration camp brings all kinds of expectations to it, and this one broke them down and created something new altogether. So we're going to talk a little bit about that with the filmmaker. This is his first feature, but we're going to hear about him for a long time, I think, and his name's Laszlo Nemes, so please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So, obviously, as I was saying, when you make a movie about something that's associated with the Holocaust, it brings all kinds of different expectations, all the more so when it's your first film. So, talk a little bit about deciding to tackle this particular subject matter for your first feature.
Well, when I was trying to make this film, there was so much resistance, especially in Europe, that so much suspicion that I should not make this film, that it's a lot of despair, but at the same time, it kind of reinforces you in this kind of obsession while making this film, that there's so much resistance, maybe I should just stick to it. And I had this for years and years. I had this idea of making a film within the context of the extermination of the Jews during Second World War, but doing it in another way than usually films depict, and go out of the usual codification system that these films rely on. I had this impression that these films relied on more a set of codes that contribute to reassure the viewer, and having this very well defined path of emotions and iconography and dramatic.
Which films are you talking about?
In general, it's it became a genre and it's on its own. I wanted to make a film that would speak to the viewer as an individual and transport the viewer to the level of one individual, and the basic idea being that in a concentration camp you don't know that much, you know very little, you don't see that much, you see very little, you hear all kinds of things you don't necessarily understand, you have a very narrow vision of it, you don't know what's going to happen next. So this is the uncertainty of time and also of space. You don't know where you're about to be taken. So these are elements that I had projected as being part of the human experience in the camp, and I never seen it. I've never seen it in films, whereas film can allow you, through the cinematic means of cinema, to convey, to have a strategy, to rely on the imagination of the viewer rather on the exposure, the overexposure. Because when you want to show too much, you actually end up reducing the scope of it. And I didn't want to reduce it. I wanted to hint at the infinity of the horror that took place, and this horror should be much more off screen, or more in the head of the viewer.
And it also focuses on such a specific role within the context of the concentration camp. This character is a Sonderkommando, which was somebody who was partly supposed to work at the camp while also being a prisoner. So it's a really unique way into that experience. How did you go about discovering this role for someone and learning more about what it was like to be in the Sonderkommando unit?
Yeah, the Sonderkommandos were a very specific groups of prisoners in the extermination process, chosen by the Nazis, Jews chosen by the Nazis to make the crematoria work. So the extermination process, they didn't have to make it, they only had to supervise it, but they didn't have, the Sonderkommandos had to, burn the bodies that were gassed and get rid of the ashes. So just making the whole process secret, as secret as possible, and making, erasing to the history of the people that were killed there. So they're really at the epicenter of the extermination, and nobody ever went there in movies. And when I first came across the writings of these Sonderkommando members, actually it was a French book containing texts by these members of the Sonderkommando, written in 1944 in secrecy, and they put these writings into the ground secretly, and they were speaking about their everyday lives and their inner feelings and their situation, their plans of rebellion. And some of these texts were found, most of them probably not, and it was an incredible set of documents that actually were constituting a sort of sense of present, not being here and now. And that's what I wanted to really to dig into and have a very simple story within this framework.
And even though it's simple, there are many unknown variables. There's a sense of mystery throughout the film because we meet this guy in the middle of his time there, and he goes on basically what feels like a real-time kind of adventure of sorts. So staging that kind of situation, what's the writing process like? It's not the most traditional way to kind of reveal somebody's sort of dramatic situation like that.
Yeah, we in previous, well, the first draft of the screenplay was more or less like that, but we had more backstory elements regarding the members of the Sonderkommando. But we found out that these people have no past and no future, as a matter of fact. They only have a present there, and it actually. It was integral part of what the approach would be, and it was within the heart of my strategy also to be in the middle of the action and in space and time, and not being able to comment on it all the time, but just seeing signs you don't necessarily understand, and seeing things and hearing things, and being in the middle of the machinery, in the middle of the machine, and you don't necessarily, as a human being, can encompass it because you're just a little part in it, and that's what interested me to have this narrowness within the individual experience.
Can you talk about some of the visual strategies that complement that, because it's such a particular look from I guess it's the Academy ratio, this boxed-in look, to just a movie that's almost entirely comprised of close-ups, or at least feels like it's a very claustrophobic vibe. So how did you go about sort of formalizing that?
Well, everything. The point of origin was what we thought about the experience of the camp. What we said about the narrowness and the limitations of it. So the strategy relied on conveying that it's actually we're talking about one individual, so it's a portrait. We were thinking of using at some time a widescreen aspect ratio, but it would have given too much away from the background, or have made the background a spectacle, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to really see one individual. So that's why we also chose the 1:3 aspect ratio, and being very close to the main character, and being at eye level. So when he's pushed to the ground, we go down with the camera, but just not, trying to do fancy tricks. We just wanted to remain at his level, and with all the limitations as a prisoner's, all the limitations that he has to experience.
And the other thing that you do that's rather atypical these days is shooting on not just film, but 35 millimeter film. It's being projected in a lot of places still on the festival circuit that way, and it certainly looks like that. I know that's not the easiest format to get your hands on for a feature-length project these days, especially not a first feature. So how did that come about, and why were you so committed to it?
My cinematographers, we shot 3 short films on 35, and we had an incredible experience. I mean, I came to filmmaking. I always wanted to be a director. It was associated with the sense of magic that I can feel while looking through a movie camera. It's an optical image. It's not a virtual image, and it's also a lot. This film is about the physicality and the chemicals, and we wanted to have this very, uncontrolled, look, because in a sense, film is much more living. You have the grains that are moving. You have when it's projected, the image is moving with darkness. So it's a physiological process, and we really believe that moviegoers should still be able to experience films, because this is an entirely different experience from watching a TV screen. This is, I sense no magic to it, and film has this veil of uncertainty, which is really interesting. And also for a period film, it really helps, because it kind of blurs a little bit the little mistakes of production design or things like that. So it's a very living texture, and we wanted this texture, and we're interested in that. So that's why we like film. And also, just one thing: the level of concentration on the set is just, you cannot compare. When you have this the film rolling, you see that, you feel that it's limited. The actors and the crew feel it's limited. You don't have thousands of ways to do that. So it's a different experience.
You can't do 4 hours of the same take just because.
Yeah, switching on the camera in the morning and switching it off in the evening. Yeah.
You talk about finding this sort of like something closer to reality about this setting, which is such a dramatic statement, talking about the Holocaust, which has been explored from so many different angles over the decades. It's one thing to kind of start out with that intention. It's another thing to see different kinds of reactions. So it's been a couple of months since this premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. What do you make of the way that people react to this movie from different perspectives?
It's extremely interesting and touching, the way people come to this film, some with apprehension. And it's interesting because those who were maybe older generations of possibly survivors or first, second time generation survivors, they those who had whom I talked to, those who had problems, beforehand watching it, and watched it eventually, came to me and thanked me for doing it, because they were not expecting that. They thought it would be a different experience. And but I have, it's very wide, from the youngest generations to the oldest, to the different responses. But it's been extremely interesting and thought-provoking. And I think the fact that people talk about it and makes possibly people think about it and go there, project their individuality into this subjective experience of it. It's something that's very interesting, and maybe there's room in cinema to have different strategies and different ways of telling stories than the traditional or the most accepted ones.
You didn't mention anyone by name, but I know one of the films admirers was Claude Lanzmann, who directed one of the great nonfiction films about the Holocaust, Shoah. So what was it like to be approached by this man, and what sort of response did you get from him after you watched the movie?
It was interesting because I met him before the screening, and everybody was scared at what would Lanzmann say about it. Everybody was really scared, and and the French distributors and all the French people, we know that he's the one who says what, he's the authority on it, and strangely I wasn't scared. I don't know why. I'm scared in all kinds of situations, but not with him. And we had an instant connection in a sense, and he said I would say what I think about the film, and I said yeah, you should go ahead, but I knew that what his problems were with the usual representations of the Holocaust, and I had the same problems. So I'm glad that he saw it, and that it touched him, in a good way, and it was very, very nice and reassuring to have him on our side.
I'm sure it was. So you talk about various other kinds of films about the Holocaust that don't deal with this subject matter the way that you have. Having gone through the experience now, why do you think that is? I mean, why has it taken so long for somebody to try to make a film that's quite as sort of immediate as this one is about this experience?
I don't know. I have no idea. There's a Russian film that's called Come and See, and it's not directly about the Holocaust, but still about one individual experience, and it's a kid's experience on the Eastern Front, and it's extremely organic and also epic, but very personal. And I think we love this film, and it was very honest, even if it's very different from what what we were aiming at. We still had this feeling of being connected to this film. I don't know why. I guess in every generation, as Geza says, the lead, he says every generation, some people have to come up with a new light on such a central subject of civilization. It's still, Holocaust is a central element of modern civilization, and I think we shouldn't see it as a myth, but see it as something very. It happened. It happened in the present for some people, and it was here and now for them, and it was done by other people. It's not on Mars. So the fact that it can, we have a relationship to the worst that's in mankind, but also possibly to the best in mankind.
It's a great way of putting it, because there are moments in the movie as one watches it where you're actually really worried about what might happen to all of these people, even though on some level there is this sense of knowing how these stories always end. So what was the process like in terms of figuring out how to make this thrilling, in a way, suspenseful, given the fact that it does bring a lot of assumptions to the table?
Yeah, it's interesting because we had to rely on, well, not necessarily. We knew that we wanted to not to rely on codes of the Holocaust, because we wanted to go back to the basics and what we thought were the facts and the experience, and be as close as possible to this experience. But then we also had to, we know that the viewer also brings in their own sets of codes and experience of seeing already films on the subject. So it's an interesting, dynamism between these two things, that it has to be a new adventure, but at the same time, we know that so many people have talked about it. So it's still an open. I haven't answered these questions, but it's an interesting conflict.
The other thing that sort of was part of the story or surrounding your film when it first arrived was that you were the only first-time filmmaker in competition at Cannes, and most people didn't know your work. So I think the one sort of thing that people latched onto is that at one point in your early career you worked with Béla Tarr, this giant of Hungarian cinema who's now not working or making films. So what sort of impact did that association have on you, and what do you make of sort of people assuming that this would be somehow connected to his work? It's very different.
I have no idea. We haven't talked in 8 years, and I was his assistant, but at some point I had to leave because otherwise I wouldn't have made anything on my own. So I don't know to what extent it was really focused on. I don't know, but it was an important experience in my life, and it helped me be prepared to make a film of that scope, and also be ambitious, and make difficult shots for this film. We needed difficult shots, and it kind of helped me a lot. Also, the importance of preparation and casting. These are things that I learned while working for him.
So having made a movie like this, does it set the bar at any particular level in terms of what you might do next? I mean, it certainly creates expectations, whether or not you want them there.
Yeah, everybody's telling me this kind of thing, and I should be very scared, and I'm sure I am. But I was so scared making this film anyway that, But the fact was that we're preparing a new film. It's going to be another Hungarian film set in the pre-World War I period. 1910 Budapest. It's the story of a young woman. It's a thriller and a coming of age. It's also about the end of civilization in a sense. So I think it's we're in times, I think, where we're not really we don't really feel necessarily the weight of civilization and the very, very thin layer that separates us from the abyss. And I think there's something today also about what might happen, and I'm interested in going to periods where there were crossroads. So that's my next project. We'll see what happens. I'm going to shoot it on film anyway, and it's going to be a widescreen film.
Subtly your ambition increases. And you recently signed with an American agency with UTA, so obviously there are American projects that must be coming across your desk as well. What do you make about that possibility?
We'll see it. We'll see with time what happens. I'm certainly interested in making films outside of Hungary, and I have ambition, and I ambitioned for some projects that are in the making and still in my head. So we'll see what happens. But I'm interested in doing different things. So we'll see. But I need time also to think everything through.
What's it like in the Hungarian film industry these days? And do you feel like the resources are there to make the kinds of movies you want to make?
Yeah, for the moment, yes. They have money for some unknown reasons. Actually, they have established a film fund that pretty much works, and have they pick some projects, and they can give money to the projects. We don't have to go to make it the European co-production. So although we can, obviously, but it's like a studio in Hungary. It's strange, but why not make films there? And they're a tradition of filmmaking in Hungary, so people are making films, and it's interesting.
It's amazing to spend half an hour talking about this movie in a room full of people who've probably, some of them have already seen it, and there's so much conversation going on around it, and it hasn't even opened in most theaters around the world yet. And at this point, there are all kinds of things being anticipated, early stirrings of an awards campaign, and different kinds of subject matters that are associated with this movie that people are going to want to dig into. What do you hope happens next?
With this film? The max, you know, what you can hope for is that the maximum number of people will see it. So we only opened in Hungary, where it did very well, and we although Hungary is a tough place for this kind of film, but we also sold it worldwide, which is great, and Sony Classics will release it in the U.S. And it's very exciting that it will go to all the continents, and that it will. I'm thrilled about it. And as for the awards, you know, you can never know what happens, obviously, but we're here.
So the most important final question is, when is it coming out in North America? What's the release date?
I think it's December 18th in North America for limited release, New York, LA, so on.
So if you missed it here, your opportunity's coming up. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.
Stick around. We have another one coming in.